Hello, I'm June Lyle, AARP Regional Vice President, and I'd like to welcome you to Real Answers Right Now from AARP. We are hosting a live Q&A program right now that reveals what caregivers really face: stress, costs, and too little support, and why it matters to you. From tax credits to workplace protections, find out how AARP is fighting for solutions that support families. Throughout the program, we'll be joined by caregiving experts, including author and AARP caregiving expert Amy Goyer. And as always, we'll be taking your questions live. Before we begin, if you would like to hear this telephone town hall in Spanish, press *0 on your telephone keypad now.
Si usted desea escuchar en español, presione *y 0 en su teléfono ahora.
AARP, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization with a membership, has been working to promote the health and well-being of older Americans for more than 65 years. Through events like this, AARP continues to provide information and resources to help older adults and those caring for them. Family caregiving affects millions of Americans, and the landscape has been shifting quickly. More adults are taking on complex care tasks, navigating medical appointments, juggling work and caregiving responsibilities, and managing rising out-of-pocket costs. With increasing caregiver stress, growing social isolation, and new policy conversations underway at both the state and federal levels, it's no surprise that families are looking for clear guidance and trusted information. That's why today we're bringing together leading voices. Our guest expert, Amy Goyer, will help break down what caregiving looks like today and the practical steps you can take to support your loved ones and yourself. We're also joined by Nicole Duritz, AARP's Director of Family and Caregiving, and Kaylin Bhatia, AARP's Director of Campaign Operations, to discuss new insights from AARP research and the broader advocacy efforts underway to support caregivers nationwide. And all of this is live. For those of you joining us on the phone, if you would like to ask a question, just press *3 on your telephone keypad to be connected with an AARP staff member who will note your name and question and place you in a queue to ask that question live. If you're joining us by Facebook or YouTube, you can post your question in the comments. Hello, if you're just joining us, I'm June Lyle with AARP, and I want to welcome you to Real Answers Right Now from AARP. Today we're talking about family caregiving, what caregivers really face, stress, costs, and too little support, and why it matters to you. From tax credits to workplace protections, find out how AARP is fighting for solutions that support families. To ask your question today, please press *3 on your telephone keypad, or you can drop it in the comments section on Facebook or YouTube. Now, I'd like to welcome our guest today. Amy Goyer is AARP's National Family and Caregiving Expert. She brings more than 35 years of experience supporting older adults, families, and people with disabilities, and has been a family caregiver herself for much of her life. She has been a trusted voice for family caregivers for many years, and we're grateful to have her with us to help guide today's conversation. Welcome, Amy. We'll also be hearing later in the program from Nicole Duritz, Director of Family and Caregiving, and Kaylin Bhatia, Director of Campaign Operations. They'll be joining us shortly to discuss new research findings and AARP's advocacy efforts supporting caregivers across the country. So, Amy, let's start with the basics. Many people don't always recognize themselves as caregivers, even when they're doing the work every day. What does it mean to be a caregiver, and how can someone know if they're stepping into that role?
Hi, June. It's good to be here today, and you're absolutely right. Most of us just don't think of ourselves as caregivers. We're just daughters and sons and spouses and partners, siblings, grandchildren. We're helping out a neighbor, but it's really important that we do identify ourselves as caregivers Mostly because there are supports available for us, and we don't know to look for them or ask for them if we don't identify as a caregiver. So, I know I didn't identify as a caregiver when I was helping my grandparents, but looking back, I absolutely was. We often care for multiple people, and we have a wide variety of caregiving roles kind of across a wide spectrum. So we may be checking on a loved one, or we may be providing full hands-on personal care. Wherever you are on that spectrum, you're a caregiver.
So Amy, you referenced this. Caregiving really can take so many forms. It can be daily tasks, like, helping somebody with their bills, to really managing some pretty complex care needs. Can you talk a bit about what kinds of tasks caregivers typically are providing to assist their loved ones?
Right. So we talk about things like social interactions, preventing someone from being isolated, which is just as bad for your health as smoking 15 cigarettes, by the way. So it's a very important role for caregivers. But we're also doing things like supporting finances and managing properties. I did this for my dad when he had Alzheimer's, just gradually increasing support over time. Coordinating healthcare providers. That's a big part of what we do. Making appointments, taking loved ones to appointments, managing medications, providing transportation, doing the shopping, helping out with the house and the yard. Sometimes that's how things start. Assisting with mobility and bathing and dressing and eating and using the toilet and all of those daily things. And more than half of us are also doing medical and nursing tasks like giving injections, managing catheters, managing medical equipment. My dad had a feeding tube for a couple of months, and that was a huge, role for me. And we're also doing a lot of wound care.
That's quite a diversity of experiences that family caregivers are undertaking, and I suspect some of the examples you gave resonate with some of our listeners today. Amy, we know that caregiving can be deeply meaningful, but it also can be incredibly challenging. Can you share some of the most common challenges or experiences that caregivers face, and in what ways can you get some support by involving more family members or others?
Yes, one of the things about being a caregiver is we always feel like we're pulled in so many directions. There's just too much to do and too little time. I always felt like I wanted to clone myself. There seems like there's always a crisis. You never know what's going to happen. It's unpredictable. So we create our plans and then things change. So we have to be very flexible and adaptable. It's a constant stress, and that chronic stress adds up and can affect our own health. And we often don't neglect our own health because we're so focused on our loved ones. And speaking of health, we navigate the healthcare system, and that's truly one of the challenges I hear the most about from family caregivers, because it's complicated, and trying to get doctor's appointments and waiting for them and trying to get care in the home and all of those things. We also are working. 70% of family caregivers ages 18 to 64 are also working at a paid or a full or part-time job. And then they're spending an average of 27 hours a week caregiving. So think how much time that's taking and energy. So our work sometimes is impacted, and we may have to make adaptations to our work. Our finances suffer. We spend about 26% of our own income on caregiving costs, and that's an average across the nation of about $7,000 a year. And that can affect our own finances. My finances were greatly challenged when I was caring for multiple people. And, so all of these things add up, June, and then we put self-care at the bottom of the list. So we're so focused on caring for someone else, and we forget to take care of ourselves. So whether it's dealing with our stress and our health care, it's also our finances and making that a priority. So, these challenges all add up. Now, you mentioned getting more help from other family members. That's one of the biggest challenges I hear from families, because the family relationships get complicated. Everyone doesn't always agree on the care plan. And it seems like some siblings are the ones who end up, the one who takes on more of the responsibilities and the roles. I always say it's really important to think very broadly about your caregiving team. Everyone may not do what you want them to do, but they may do something. So think about it as a big puzzle. Okay, maybe this sibling will not help with hands-on care, but they're good with finances. So maybe they can deal with the finances from afar. Or maybe they're really good at organizing, or they're good at cooking and they can make meals. They'll come and clean the house. And other people may be really, really good at helping with that hands-on care and helping someone with bathing or just bringing light into their lives and socialization. So think about what their strengths are and try to focus on those rather than just beating your head up against a wall with someone who's just not going to do what you want them to do. But then also look outside the family. You know, if my caregiving team had only been family, it would have been really, really small. So I have to look at the healthcare providers and, you know, the neighbors and the friends and everybody else who pitches in. But also, you know, I look at my respite care provider that came from the VA and our home-based primary care team from the VA. All of those folks, as well as my mom's hairstylist who would come to the house when I couldn't get her there. They were all part of the caregiving team.
So, Amy, you mentioned doctors and healthcare providers as being a key part of that team. How can caregivers partner effectively with medical teams, and why is that so important?
Yes, about 64% of caregivers communicate with their loved ones' healthcare providers, according to our latest data from Caregiving in the U.S. 2025. And it's a big part of our role. And it's really important to have that good relationships because that helps us achieve our goal, which is just the best possible care for our loved ones. So that's the bottom line. You need to do your basic things, like make sure you get legal authority so that they can talk to you. If you get a healthcare power of attorney, make sure the HIPAA forms are completed if needed. And come to appointments prepared. They appreciate that. You know, have your questions written down and prioritized, because I would go in with a list of 10 or 12 questions, and some doctors had time to answer them and some didn't. So they'd say, what are your top 3 priorities? Document everything, take notes for everything, because sometimes I could find what the doctor said at the last appointment faster than they could looking in their records. So it's really important to be prepared in that way. I think, you know, having mutual respect, June, is one of the things that's most effective. You know, express your gratitude, be pleasant with them. You're stressed out and you come into an appointment stressed out, and they're going to pick up on that. So take a deep breath, try to be very proactive with your communication, use your good communication skills, but always try to figure out who in the office is also going to get things done. You know, sometimes you figure out this particular receptionist or this tech or physician's assistant or someone in the office is going to get you that record that you need or call in that prescription. You know, think about when's the best time to communicate with them, when's the best time to leave a message or call. And you know, be polite about that, but focus on getting your results done, because the bottom line is your role is to be an advocate for your loved ones. It's not to be their best friend, but you need to have a good relationship. So don't hesitate to ask the questions, you know, keep pushing when you need to respectfully, and be aware that that's your role, that's your job.
Amy, before we go to the phones, does AARP have any resources to help caregivers navigate these conversations with doctors and other local professionals? Yes, we have a really great Family Caregivers Questions Guide, and you can get that at aarp.org/caregiverquestions. And it includes suggestions of questions to ask home health care providers and assisted living and nursing home providers. When your loved one's in the hospital, what to ask. Discharge planning is a big piece of it. It asks, what do you ask a discharge planner when your loved one's leaving the hospital and going home or to a rehab facility? But also, like, what questions do you ask? Does your loved one have long-term care insurance? And what do you ask about that? And the pharmacist was like my best friend when caregiving for my parents, because they were so helpful. What do you ask the pharmacist? What are the things that you can do? So this guide is really very helpful. It also addresses legal and financial providers. So when you're stumped about where to go, check out this guide, aarp.org/caregiverquestions. And we also include a list of agencies locally that can be very helpful. I also wrote a column on the AARP website, 10 tips for family caregivers managing medical matters. And you can find that along with many other great resources in this area at the AARP caregiving site at aarp.org/caregiving. Great. Those sound like wonderful resources, and encourage our listeners to take advantage of those. And it's now time to address your questions live with Amy Goyer. As a reminder, you can press *3 at any time on your telephone keypad to be connected with AARP staff to share your questions. And a quick reminder, this program is for general educational purposes. For specific guidance to your situation, please do consult with a qualified professional. I'd now like to bring in AARP Vice President Jesse Salinas, who is going to help facilitate your calls. Welcome, Jesse.
So glad to be here, June.
All right, Jesse, let's take our first question. Who do we have?
Yep, our first question comes from Facebook. It's from somebody named Lib, and they ask, what do I do when siblings refuse to help with caregiving?
Amy, that's a great question, and I think you alluded to some of these challenges earlier. Say more.
Yes. Well, I think you need to think about why they're refusing. So is it because they are at a distance and they are just can't afford maybe to come and help in person, or are working or have other family responsibilities? What's the barrier? And how can you work around that barrier and adapt what you're asking them to do? The other thing is communication. I find that, again, caregiving is so stressful. And we approach these conversations sometimes, desperate. And that comes across. And sometimes people feel defensive and then they refuse to participate. So prepare for those conversations. I have an article on the website. I wrote about 5 tips for difficult family caregiving conversations. So if you look up that article, one of the first things I say is to do your homework first. So again, think about what they are most likely to help with and what is realistic for them. And I say that not because it's fair or what they should be doing, but because you cannot waste your time trying and your energy. We find that it hurts us more when we're angry at these family members who won't help, because it drags us down. So try to think about realistically, what can this person do that might be helpful? I think it's always easy to think that we know what someone else's life is like, and maybe we don't. For example, maybe you have a family member who's gets a lot of anxiety around hands-on care and being around a person who's sick and all of those things. But again, they're maybe willing to do other things if you ask them the right questions.
All right, great advice. Thank you, Amy, and great question from our Facebook participant. Jesse, who else do we have on the line?
Yep, we're going to bring in Kenneth from Indiana.
All right. Kenneth, you are live. What is your question?
I was just wondering, are there any personal benefits to becoming a caregiver? And if so, what is the best way to be recognized or qualify as being a caregiver?
All right, Amy, what are ways to be? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I hear a few different issues in that question. First of all, there are some good things about being a caregiver, and our most recent Caregiving in the U.S. survey found that 51% of family caregivers say there's a sense of purpose. And so it's important to remember that there are good things. And I can tell you, I went through more than a dozen years, really stressful, caring for 3 people on different sides of the country and everything. But I had so much more quality time, especially with my parents who lived with me, that I'll always be so happy that I have that. So I don't have regrets in that. I also heard maybe you were asking about maybe getting paid to be a caregiver, being recognized as the caregiver. So I want to address those 2 things. First of all, being recognized as a caregiver. There are many healthcare providers now who include in their forms where someone can fill in, this is my caregiver. They are able to receive information about me and that type of thing. So make sure that the healthcare providers recognize and know that you are their primary caregiver or one of their caregivers. In terms of being counted as a family caregiver and getting paid to be a caregiver, we have a few resources that can be helpful for that. One is AARP Foundations has a paid for care site. So if you just search for that, aarp.org/paid for care, you can go in and find out. Medicaid is one possibility if your loved one is in a state that has a Medicaid waiver for in-home care. And if you qualify, so for example, in some states, you can't live with the person that you're providing the care for, so that would count you out. You might be able to get paid something through Medicaid. Another option is you're caring for a veteran. There are some veterans programs that pay family caregivers, and they are they don't usually stipulate that you can't live with the person. And then there are private pay can be used to pay someone through their own funds. I suggest that you create a caregiver agreement and make sure that you're addressing taxes, because the IRS will view you as an employee if you're being paid to a certain extent. So talk with your tax professional about what you can do around that. So those are some of the things. So that's what I heard in the question. June, do you think I addressed everything?
I think you did a great job, and those are all wonderful resources. The one other thing that I would mention is I'd encourage Kenneth to check out the AARP Indiana state webpage, and there is a document there called Family Caregiver Resources for Indiana that is state specific, and that's going to be the case for states across the country. So if you take a look at your state AARP webpage, there will be some good local resources there in addition to the great resources that Amy already mentioned. So good luck, Kenneth. Jesse, I think we have time for one more question in this segment. Who do we have?
Yep, this one also comes from Facebook. Joyce asks, what do you do if you have no siblings or close family to help you with your caregiving needs or some of the responsibilities that you're trying to take on as a caregiver?
Yes, I mentioned before that we have to look broadly for our caregiving team. It truly is one of the most common issues that comes up. And I moderate a Facebook group for family caregivers that's called the AARP Family Caregivers Discussion Group on Facebook. We have almost 25,000 family caregivers there, and this comes up all the time. So you have to broaden. So the first thing I suggest people do is contact their local area agency on aging and ask what kind of home and community-based services are available for my loved one and for me as a caregiver, because they also have programs to support family caregivers. That might include respite care. So maybe you get a few hours of respite care every week or every month, and that's one piece of your puzzle. Maybe another piece of your puzzle, your loved one is a veteran, and you can get some support from the VA. Maybe another piece of your puzzle is that your loved one goes to an adult daycare center. And that is a less expensive way to have them be with other people, have programming, have a meal. Some of them even provide bathing and some other services, and then come home at the end of the day. And it's a less expensive cost than one-to-one care at home. So that might be a big part of your team. You might have some paid help. And many caregivers, we do hire people to come in and help and supplement the care that we're providing. So that might be another piece of your puzzle. So as June mentioned, we have AARP State Caregiver Resource Guides. You can find whatever state you're in, you can go to aarp.org/caregiver resource guides, and you can find there a list of agencies and organizations and things that might be helpful to you, including any special respite programs your state may have and that type of thing. So I encourage you to think, and then, the other piece of this team is who helps the caregiver, because we are so focused on caring for loved ones, we often can't deal with our own lives. So I always felt like my neighbor who mowed my lawn and sorted my mail for me, or who looked at me, or my best friend who would do research for me from a distance on the best piece of medical equipment for my loved one, or the person who just encourages you, who you can call at any time and say, I'm losing it, or I'm so happy this happened, and be there for you. Those, your caregiver support group, those are part of your team. So it feels like so much more of a safety net when you look at this more broadly.
Well, thanks, Amy, and I want to give a special thanks to our listeners and those who are joining us by Facebook and YouTube for the great questions that you all are sharing today about some of the challenges and questions around caregiving. A reminder that if you have a question, you can press *3 at any time on your telephone keypad to be connected with AARP staff to share your questions and might have the opportunity to get some great advice from our caregiving experts, including Amy Goyer. But now let's take a moment to talk about what's happening in Washington and state capitals across the country and how AARP is fighting for you. Joining us today is AARP's Chief Advocacy and Engagement Officer, Nancy Lamond. Nancy, welcome.
Thanks, June. I'm glad to be here.
So, Nancy, as we talk about caregiving, what actions are being taken within the government to support family caregivers, and what is AARP's role?
Well, AARP is working hard to make life easier for family caregivers. You've just heard from Amy so many of the challenges. At the federal level, we're pushing Congress to pass the Credit for Caring Act, which would give working family caregivers up to $5,000 in tax credits to help pay for things like home care aides, adult daycare, and home modifications. We also support the Lowering Costs for Caregivers Act, so caregivers can use their health savings and flexible spending accounts to help pay for a parent's care, for example. And we continue to fight for paid family leave, so caregivers don't have to choose between going to work and getting a paycheck and caring for a loved one.
And Nancy, how about at the state level? What's going on there?
Well, states are really stepping up. Since 2015, AARP's advocacy has led to hundreds of legislative victories across all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. With AARP's support, many states have expanded paid leave programs so caregivers can take time off without losing income. Others have made respite care more affordable so caregivers can get a break to rest and recharge. And some states are helping nursing home residents with more financial flexibility for everyday needs. These changes make a real difference for families.
So, Nancy, Medicare is also very important to our listeners, either for themselves or for the family members that they're caring for. What's AARP doing to protect Medicare?
Well, June, as you can imagine, we spend a lot of time on Medicare. AARP is working to make sure health coverage stays strong and affordable, not just for today's retirees, but for generations to come, with guaranteed benefits that truly meet people's needs. We're also winning the fight for lower drug prices. Starting in 2026, a couple of months from now, 10 major medications will cost less because Medicare is finally allowed to negotiate for lower prices. AARP helped make that possible, along with a cap on what seniors with Medicare prescription drug plans will pay out of pocket for their medication. Beginning in January, that will be $2,100. The big drug companies are still trying to delay the savings from Medicare negotiation, but AARP will keep fighting to protect those gains we've made, and it's all designed to help put money back in the pockets of older adults.
And Nancy, 'tis the season. It is Medicare open enrollment as we speak. What should our listeners keep in mind?
Well, and I will tell all of you, I am a Medicare recipient, and I am trying to go through all of the information now. From now until December 7th, folks who are already in the Medicare program can make changes to their coverage. It's really a good time to reevaluate and make sure you have the coverage that works best for you. You can switch from original Medicare to a Medicare Advantage plan. You could pick a different Part D prescription drug plan if you're on original Medicare, or if you're already on Medicare Advantage, you can go to a different plan that might work better for you, or change to original Medicare and pick up a Part D drug plan. It can be really confusing, but I urge everyone to take time and do it soon to figure out what is best for you. There are plenty of resources for free guides and resources that might help you search. Look at AARP Medicare Open Enrollment online.
Great, good information to share with our listeners, Nancy. And with the holidays coming up and next year being an election year, how is AARP preparing?
Well, we know that holidays are a especially busy time for caregivers, and AARP is here for you. As we head into 2026, we'll keep fighting for the issues that matter most: caregiving, Medicare, Social Security, and lowering costs generally. We'll make sure your voice is heard as priorities are being shaped for these midterm elections.
And Nancy, what can our listeners do to help?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. All of our listeners can speak up. Email your lawmakers and tell them supporting family caregivers matters to you. AARP is calling on Congress to help family caregivers save money and time and give them the resources they need. We need you to join us. Visit aarp.org/support-caregivers to sign our letter to Congress and tell them family caregivers need their support.
That's aarp.org/support-caregivers. Nancy, thank you so much for being here and for all you do.
Well, thank you, June. Thanks for moderating this. Thanks to our panelists. And let me say, for those of us who work at AARP, it's an honor to stand up for family caregivers and their families, as well as all Americans aged 50 and over.
Now let's come back to our conversation with caregiving expert Amy Goyer. I'd also like to invite Nicole DeRitt, AARP's Director of Family and Caregiving, and Kaylin Bhatia, AARP's Director of Campaign Operations. They're joining our conversation for the first time today to help unpack new research and the broader picture of caregiver health and well-being. And remember, if you'd like to ask a question live, just press *3 on your telephone keypad at any time. So I would like to start with Kaylin and dig in a little bit on this recent research on caregiving. Kaylin, what does the latest AARP research reveal about the health and well-being of family caregivers?
Well, thanks so much, June, and really happy to be on to talk about this important topic. As Nancy mentioned and as Amy has said, family caregivers are an important part of our long-term care system, taking care of their loved ones as they age. We recently released a study, a report called Caregiving in the United States, or Caregiving in the U.S., and it recently found that there are 63 million caregivers in the country. That's 1 in 4 adults. So a lot of caregivers out there. To compare, when we released this report about 10 years ago in 2015, we found that there was a little over 43 million. So that's a 20 million jump from over the last 10 years. So family caregiving is just a part of life now. You either are a family caregiver, or a family caregiver, or will be a family caregiver. And in some ways, the report confirmed a few things that we already know, stuff that Amy's mentioned, as well as Nancy mentioned. Family caregivers are the backbone of long-term care in the United States. They help loved ones stay in their homes as they age and make sure they don't go into expensive nursing homes. And what this report found, and for the first time ever, we did this across all 50 states, their experiences do vary from state to state, but there are certain commonalities. Those commonalities are high-intensity caregiving is very common. Financial strain is a major issue, and many caregivers report economic hardship and have difficulty accessing affordable support services. Amy referenced some of that earlier. For those still in the workforce, balancing work and caregiving is a challenge, and caregiving well-being is at risk. This includes physical, mental, and emotional health. And healthcare systems often overlook family caregivers. As I said, the state data does vary. I'm not going to go through all 50 states, but I'm a native Texan, so I want to share just a few quick stats about my home state. In Texas, there are 5 million family caregivers. 67% of them have worked while doing caregiving duties. A little over half care for an aging parent. And nearly 60% experience at least one negative financial impact, like taking on more debt, stopping saving for retirement, or being able to afford basic expenses.
All right, and I want to bring Nicole into the conversation. Nicole, building on these challenges that Kaylin just outlined, how else can caregiving affect our health over time? And we are hearing a lot about social isolation these days. What role does that play in caregiver stress, and are there ways that it can be addressed?
Hi, June. Thank you. And I'm excited to be able to talk with everyone today. You know, a lot of what Amy had spoken about earlier can affect health over time. We know that, as Kaylin just pointed out, there's a lot of folks that report physical strain. When you are helping a loved one move from a bed to a chair, or trying to help them get into a car to go to a doctor's appointment, that can put a physical strain on your body. And in addition to that, just basic stress can put a toll on your body. We know that, as Caitlin just highlighted, so many of caregivers are working. We find that 61% of caregivers who are working 40 hours or more. And in addition to that, they're taking care of their loved ones. We know that a third of caregivers are what we call sandwich generation. So they're caring for someone like an older parent perhaps, and they also are taking care of kids. So again, when you are not having the opportunity to sleep, when you are trying to juggle a lot of things, that can be incredibly stressful. It can impact your health as well as your mental well-being. And all of these things can contribute to that feeling of social isolation, that you are doing this alone, or you don't have time to interact with those people who might be able to talk about something different. And those are some challenges that we see caregivers talk about all the time. A quarter of caregivers report that they feel a bit alone in their work. And I think the most important thing to say is, you know, there are things that you can do to address these feelings. Amy talked about the Facebook group and how this is a group of people who are coming together. I was just speaking earlier last week with Karen, who cared for her father in the last few years of his life. And she was doing most of this all by herself. And she said she went onto that Facebook page and didn't feel alone. She knew there were other people that were going through those same experiences. She felt supported. She felt heard. So there are places that you can go to get that support. And sometimes you just have to raise your hand and say you need some help. Turn to friends. Maybe you have other family members that hadn't been as engaged before and they might be engaged more. So there's a lot you can do. Again, we've talked a lot about the resources at AARP, and I really, really encourage folks to turn to these amazing resources because there is a lot of support out there. And then the final thing I'll say is many of the caregivers that I have spoken to, I help my parents also. It is so rewarding to be able to have that special time with your loved ones and providing them some care and love.
Thanks, Nicole, for those. Are some great insights, suggestions, and resources. And it is now time to take more of your questions live with Amy Goyer, Nicole Duritz, and Kaylin Bhatia. If you'd like to join our conversation, please press *3 on your telephone keypad to be connected with AARP staff and to share your question. As a reminder, this program is for general educational purposes. For guidance specific to your situation, please consult with a qualified professional. Jesse, who do we have on the line?
Yep, we've got a question from YouTube. This is from Catherine in Maryland, who asks, how can a caregiver benefit from technology? Are there resources specifically designed for caregivers that I should look at online?
Great question. Amy, thoughts on technology to support family caregivers?
Yes, Catherine, we have, we're living in an age where caregiving is very different than when I was caring for my grandparents because of technology. It's really changed caregiving more than anything. So from safety things like having medical alert or medical or personal emergency alert response mechanisms like a watch type thing that you can wear, a lavalier. We also even have radar fall detection. There are things that you can put on the wall or on a table that a person doesn't have to wear anything, and those can be very, very helpful. One of the things I wrote an article about how to choose a personal emergency response system because or medical alert, because that's one of the top questions we get, and because it's one of the first things we do to help keep our loved ones safe. So if you look on the AARP website, you'll find that. And then, we move on, safety things can also be things like having a digital door lock so that if a home health aide comes to help your loved one bathe, they can have their own code that comes in. It's only available for these 2 hours. They're not going to be able to get in the house any other time. Or you can even open the door from a distance, and that's really helpful as well. And then, I had, my dad would get out of bed at night, and I needed to know if he was getting up and getting out of bed. And so I had a floor mat alarm that was right next to his bed. And the minute his feet hit that alarm, that mat, an alarm would go off and it would wake me up. I also had motion sensor alarms in the hallways, video cameras that can help us monitor our loved ones and make sure they're okay and safe, and even communicate with them two-way, even from a distance. You may be at work and you can call, go on the two-way camera and see them and talk to them. That smart speakers have taken on a lot of that role, and especially the ones that have a screen where they can just answer a phone call by saying, the keyword, and then please, answer my phone call, or call so-and-so, call my daughter, call whoever the person is that they're trying to reach, without having to figure out how to deal with a smartphone or a complicated phone. So a lot of those smart home tools are really helpful for caregivers. There are even apps and things that you can do with these smart speakers that you can program to do medication reminders and make sure, say, Robert, it's time to take your medication now, and it'll just come on and say that without you being there, and sometimes send you an alert that he got a response. So there's such a wide variety. I could go on and on for this, and I don't want to take too much time, but there's also medication dispensers and smart medication boxes that will say it's time to take your medication. And then there's communication from a distance that can help with socialization, with video chat. We have a great section on the AARP website, personal technology. We have a lot of great information there. And then at our caregiving site, part of our AARP site, we also have articles specific for caregiving on technology. So I encourage you to get creative with that, embrace it, because it can really make your job easier.
All right. Thanks, Amy. Some great resources and clearly some significant developments in the caregiving technology space for folks to take advantage of. Jesse, let's go back to our phones, and who do we have on the line?
Yep, we're going to bring on Diane from Georgia.
Hi, Diane. What's your question?
Hey, my question is, if you are the person that needs care, where do you look for people to help you? I have family, but they're not up for it. They're still working.
Great question. Let's go to our experts and see, and maybe let's start with Kaylin and then see if Amy or Nicole have anything to add on this one.
Happy to jump in. Thanks. Thank you for the question. And as Amy said, it really takes a village to be able to help provide care. So if you are looking for care, you really should maybe start with some of your medical professionals. Start with your PCP. That's of course your primary care physician. Start talking to them and to some of those in their office, nurses, to see what resources you have. I'd also recommend you, I believe you're from Georgia, recommend visiting our Caregiver Resource Guide for Georgia, which has a lot of information, including our Family Caregiving Resource Line. That number is 1-877-333-5885 to be able to help you navigate some of that. But talk to your medical professionals, talk to some of your friends around you, and be able to help create that network. So as you need care, as you age, you have a good team and a good plan in front of you.
All right. Thanks, Kaylin. Jesse, do we have another caller?
Yep, I've got another one from Facebook. Comes from Kevin in Ohio, and he asks, how can families start conversations about caregiving before a crisis happens?
Great question. Amy, I'm going to toss this one to you. What are your thoughts on how to start the conversation sooner rather than later?
I always say talk early and talk often. Talk early before you're in a crisis situation, and often because things change. Your financial situation may change, your loved one's wishes or their health status may change. And when you have these conversations, people struggle with how to bring things up. Mom, someday you're not going to be driving anymore. What's our plan going to be? Or what happens when you're not safe in your home? And I think a good way to look at it is to have a short, it's not going to be one conversation. So you can introduce a subject sometimes indirectly. I listened to this tele-town hall and it made me think I should ask you about this. Or I watched a webinar, or my friend is going through this with her mother and I thought we should talk about this so we're prepared if there's a day when you need more help or need changes. I think, approaching it that way will work for many people. For other people, they want a direct response, approach. So know the person that you're talking to. As I mentioned before, do your research ahead of time. What is your main concern? Are you thinking that your loved one isn't safe in the home? Then research what the options are before you have a conversation with them about that. Is there someplace else they could live? Is there changes and modifications that can be made to the home to make it safe? We have a great guide, the Home Fit Guide, that's really helpful for that you can find at aarp.org/homefit. So, and if it's legal matters, maybe they don't have their affairs in order in terms of powers of attorney and their estate planning, then to approach that is, I want to make sure I'm prepared to do what you want. So this isn't about you getting something or whatever. This is about them getting what they want. And if you approach it that way, sometimes people are a little bit more amenable to it. So those are just a few top tips. We have more great information on our caregiving website as well.
Thanks, Amy. Let's continue our conversation with Nicole Duritz, Amy Goyer, and Kaylin Bhatia. And remember, if you'd like to ask a question, please press *3 at any time. So, Kaylin, we have talked about a wide variety of challenges today that caregivers face. How is AARP working to bring these issues to the attention of lawmakers at the federal, state, whatever level?
I'm so glad you asked, June, and I want to build off of what Nancy said earlier in our Fighting for You segment. We made sure that lawmakers on every level of government, that's federal, state, and local, they understand what caregivers are going through and that they need help with money, time, and support. And to that end, caregivers are voters. And as Nancy mentioned, 2026 is a pretty big election year. Helping caregivers be able to financially take care of their loved ones is both good policy and smart politics. But of course, we can't do this alone. And just as Nancy asked, I'm also asking all of you to go to aarp.org/support caregivers. Again, that's aarp.org/support caregivers, to tell your member of Congress that family caregivers need help saving money and time, and they need resources and support. Again, that's aarp.org/support caregivers to sign AARP's letter to Congress to tell them family caregivers need support.
And Nicole, what legislative wins have occurred at the state or federal level that show that lawmakers really are responding to AARP's caregiving advocacy?
There are so many things that we can highlight that are happening at the state level and at the federal level. First off, I'd like to say one of the amazing things about caregiving is this is not a red or a purple or even a blue issue. This is a family issue. This is an issue that crosses all kinds of political lines. And we are seeing very clearly that we have support all across different parties and different perspectives, because everyone cares and understands the important role that caregivers play. So, wonderful things are happening. And we'll focus first on the states. We have caregiving tax credits. As Nancy described, the Credit for Caring Act. Well, similar types of approaches have passed in Georgia and Missouri and Montana, New Jersey, South Carolina, Oklahoma, and Nebraska, where they're all a little bit different, but they provide some type of a tax relief, a financial relief for people who are caring for a loved one. And additionally, Nancy mentioned a few of these things in her discussions, but one of the areas that I think is really important that sometimes is overlooked is something that's called a personal needs allowance. So for an individual who lives in a nursing home and might be getting some support and assistance in paying their way, they used to carve out a little bit of money so that they can, have some things that for their personal use. And in different states, we've actually seen increases in that personal needs allowance. So, it might have been that they got $30 a month, and in a state it doubled up to $60 a month. And that might seem like, well, what would somebody need? Well, it might be a hairbrush. It might be, I need a new toothbrush, or I want a specific type of shampoo. And honestly, it's often, I want to be able to buy my granddaughter a birthday card and send her a card. So that might not seem like it's super important, but it can really impact someone's quality of life. Another thing that we're seeing across states, and I'll give an example. This year in Maine, they passed a piece of legislation which they called Respite for Maine. So when you look at it, it says Respite for Me because that's the state abbreviation for the state of Maine. And what it did is it expanded the criteria for caregivers that would qualify for some respite care, and that additional expansion provided some financial support so people could get some additional respite so that they could recharge themselves when they needed that, so they can continue to care for that loved one. So we're seeing just a variety of different types of creative approaches to support caregivers in those areas that Kaylin had outlined. And at the federal level, as Nancy mentioned, we've got a number of different pieces of legislation that have bipartisan support that we are working with members of Congress to get across that finish line so they can get signed by the president and passed into law.
All right. Thank you, Nicole. We have talked a fair bit today as a theme throughout a number of these conversations about the financial strain that can be caused by caregiving. What are the biggest financial challenges that caregivers face, and how can policies help ease the strain? And I'll turn to both Nicole and Amy to get your thoughts on this one.
Well, I'll jump in really quickly.
I can jump in and
go ahead, Amy.
No, I was going to say I can talk about the challenges, and you can talk about the policies, maybe if that works. We know that about 26% of our annual income is spent on caregiving expenses, more than $7,000 a year on average, and the cost of care is really high. So, for example, a home health aide at 40 hours a week can cost nearly $80,000 a year. A private home and room in a nursing home, $130,000 a year. Adult daycare may be more affordable at $26,000 a year, but some people can't afford that. So as caregivers, we kind of step in, and those day-to-day costs are high. Incontinence supplies was a huge part of my budget when I was caring for my parents. And so, our loved ones just won't cover everything. And then, we step in, and more of us are caring for multiple people too, which was part of my challenge. And I did it for over a dozen years, and I ended up in bankruptcy. And I'm a caregiving expert, but I'm not a financial expert. So we often just don't talk about money, and we don't get help from financial experts for the caregivers. We focus on our loved ones' finances and do a good job with theirs, but not necessarily with ours.
And I'll jump in. Amy mentioned how expensive incontinence supplies can be, for example. Well, in Alabama, they just actually passed a piece of legislation that gives tax breaks for incontinence supplies. So that's something that we're seeing. Again, I said there's lots of creative approaches for how you can provide, how legislators are providing support for caregivers. We also, the federal legislation that we're talking about, Credit for Caring, again, as Nancy described earlier, would allow caregivers to get a non-refundable tax credit to cover some of the expenses, whether it's a home modification, or maybe you have to modify your vehicle so someone can get in and out, or maybe there are other expenses. We had a briefing for congressional staff yesterday, and we had a caregiver on the line who talked about the fact that she's caring for her husband who has early-stage Alzheimer's, and in the past year, he lost his glasses 3 times. And so that could be a big expense. And so some of these different pieces of legislation would help offset some of those costs. We talked about the lowering costs for caregivers. That's if you have a health savings account, you could use that for the person you're caring with. Now, in the situation I just described, it was her husband, so that would be covered anyway. But if for Amy's example, when she was caring for a parent, it would allow her to use that money to help cover some of those expenses. So there are some policies that are being advanced that would help address the financial strain.
Let's take more of your questions live with Amy Goyer, Nicole Duritz, and Kaylin Bhatia. And before we do that, a quick reminder, this program is for general educational purposes. For guidance specific to your situation, please consult with a qualified professional. Jesse, who do we have on the line?
Yep, we've gotten a lot on social media today. So I've got Claire from Facebook who asks, I need to talk with my siblings about caring for a mother. Any tips for how to approach this conversation?
All right. I'm going to start with Amy and then see if Kaylin or Nicole have anything to add. Working with siblings, Amy.
Yes, as I mentioned, this is one of the biggest issues that comes up, especially in our Facebook group. So I would urge Claire to join the AARP Family Caregivers discussion group on Facebook. It's a great question to pose, and people can share with you what worked for them. I can tell you that I want to go back to what I said earlier about focusing on what they can and will do. And that can be really hard when you have so great needs, and what you really need is for them to come and provide some hands-on care. But they are just never going to do it. And so if you can find other things that they will do, whether it's managing the finances from afar or coming and doing some home modifications or cleaning up the yard on a regular basis or providing meals, so look at the whole picture of needs and try to pick out what people's strengths are and what they're willing to do with siblings. I think, with siblings, it's especially tricky because we don't always agree on the plan. So one sibling may be saying, Mom needs to go in a nursing home, and another one might be saying, Mom needs to stay at home. And we all need to gather around and do all this for them. And the other sibling is like, well, I don't want to do all that, so I think Mom should go live somewhere else. Not fully understanding that even when Mom lives somewhere else, there is still a lot of caregiving to do. So, try to approach it as we're all on the same team, and our goal is for Mom to be as independent as possible for as long as possible, and how can we work together to make that happen?
And I'll jump in also because I was going to jump in and say, I've been navigating this for the past a couple of years myself. And again, just as Amy said, it's the divide and conquer approach. My brother is more comfortable kind of having those financial conversations. I'm more comfortable helping my parents navigate the health system. So we do divide and conquer. And I will also say, thinking about my husband and his sister, one of the things that's really important is you have to speak up. My husband and I live in Virginia, and my in-laws live in Minnesota. And so, we were traveling back and forth, but it really took my sister-in-law to tell my husband, I need you here. I need some additional help. So sometimes when you're navigating that, someone who might not be living in the same area with the loved one might just need to know that, the sister was challenged and needed a little bit and us to step up in a different way than we had been. So that conversation sometimes can be uncomfortable, but you always approach it with love and understanding, and you can navigate it. It's not easy, but it does work.
Well, thank you, Amy, Nicole, and Kaylin. This has been an important discussion today, and thank you so much for sharing your insights and answering questions from our folks participating both by phone and by YouTube and Facebook. Thanks to Nancy Lamont for joining us earlier in our Fighting for You segment. And most especially, thank you, our AARP members, volunteers, and listeners for participating in today's discussion. AARP, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization with a membership, has been working to promote the health and well-being of older Americans for more than 65 years. All of the resources referenced today, including a recording of today's Q&A event, can be found at aarp.org/conversations. That's aarp.org/conversations on November 14th. Thanks to all of you and have a good day. This concludes our call.